Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I am very, very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Sarah Kalmeta. Sarah, also known as Sarah the Pivoter, is an internationally acclaimed speaker with almost 20 years in aviation, aerospace, and leadership. She's loved for her bold, authentic style and known for her way to light up a room. Sarah's worked with Fortune 500 companies around the world and helps individuals and organizations optimize their performance and navigate transitions effectively, emphasizing resilience and strategic planning. As a sought after speaker and event host, Sarah's insights focus on leadership, navigating the unknown, and redefining change. Sarah's holistic approach to her events underscores the importance of mental, emotional, and physical well being in achieving success. She believes change is good and is known for her advocacy for bringing your full self to the table and being able to pivot and pivot often. Passionate about STEAM, Sarah is committed to excellence and creativity while also helping others discover and achieve their potential. As you can see, Sarah is a true leader, not only in the aerospace industry, but just in general, educating the general public about STEAM and ways they can bring their own passions and integrate it with the current space. And so I'm very excited to learn about Sarah's journey, how she got to where she is today, and her insights into the future of the space economy. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders. I'm so, so excited to be able to speak with you today.
It's a pleasure, Gitika. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah, to just kick off our conversation, I wanted to learn a little bit more about your day to day. What are your current main activities? What are you trying to focus your time on? Because I know you're involved in a lot of many different initiatives. So I'm curious, how do you generally structure your day?
So each day is a little bit different, I must say. I kind of plan the week ahead and look at, am I traveling? Am I at home? And I always try to maintain some semblance of routine. So if I'm at home, that usually looks up. I wake up pretty early. I meditate first thing, take my dog out, get some exercise, and that really helps set the tone for the day. I usually do podcasting on Thursdays, so that is outlined for that. My mornings are free so that I can have creative time and really dive more into strategy of my business and work on where do I want to go? What opportunities do I have that I need to follow up on? And then the afternoons will be, depending on what projects I'm on, I'll kind of portion those out to allot my time between the different activities. Because some months I have one event and other months I have four. And so, I just need to make sure that I manage my time effectively across those different things.
Wonderful. And I'm curious a little bit to learn more about your podcast. So, can you share a little bit more about kind of what was the inspiration for starting it and the main purpose of the podcast, as well as how, with your different projects, you integrate aerospace and aviation? I know you've been in this space for over 20 years, which is amazing. So, I'm curious how you kind of are integrating your current work with the aerospace sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is now called The Lounge. So if you Google The Lounge with Sarah the Pivoter, you'll find it on YouTube. I do a live show, a live stream. And so when I go live, I'll stream to Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. You can subscribe on the YouTube channel. When I first started, though, I was doing Instagram lives, and I was living in Hong Kong at the time, actually. And at that time, I had just started my business, Pivot Point, and I was really talking to people about the changes they were going through. And, especially in 2020, there were a lot of people that were starting their own businesses, doing something they'd never done before. And so we were just talking about what did that change look like for them? How did they navigate that? And I just had a lot of fun with it. I love talking to people. I'm very curious. And, it started because I got invited by someone else to be on their podcast. And they were interviewing me about a different business that I had started. And I was like, this is so much fun. Like, maybe I want to do this. So I just started doing it, casually for fun. And then it grew into the Pivot Cast. And I started doing them more formally. Used a platform called StreamYard and was, going live. And then it morphed into the lounge, which is what it is now. And the reason why I came up with the lounge is, it's a little bit more relaxed. What do you do in a lounge? You're, getting ready for the thing that you're about to do. Maybe that's the lounge at your hotel or the lounge at your airport. And so obviously being in aviation, pilots do their pre-flight briefing in a lounge as well as their post-flight briefing. So it was a big metaphor for life. that we are going to go on many different trips in our lives, go on many different journeys. We not only need to plan for them, but we should re-evaluate on the other end as well and make sure, like, hey, how did that go? Did it go according to plan? Did I like it? Do I want to go back there or not? And to understand that sometimes we take off, we think we're ready, right? We've learned something, we've gotten a new tool, and we're like, I can do this. And then, we're taking off in a thunderstorm and we realize, oh, actually, like I'm not that confident in using this tool. And so it feels really bumpy and you're really stressed the entire time. And that's also a metaphor for life. We learn like, okay, great, there's a breathwork practice. But just because you've learned it one time doesn't mean that it's easy and smooth when you use it, right? It takes time, practice, hours to get to a level of competency where, you don't panic because you hit some turbulence. You just stay calm, you know what you're doing, you can rely on your knowledge, your systems, your capability. And that also transfers over to aerospace very well. Astronauts have to do, obviously their missions are not as frequent, but they are going through a similar process. And in a lounge too at an airport, when you're just flying, maybe you're not piloting the aircraft, you're in this space with other people who are all going to different places, but you're there to do the same thing, which is to rest and rejuvenate. And, you're in this pivot point, this space between your journey, right? You're en route. And so I thought that was just a really great metaphor for how we can adopt a new perspective for the things we encounter and recognize that, hey, sometimes we might go between the same place a couple times back and forth, and that's okay. And then other times we go down new journeys and new experiences. So yeah, it's been an evolution and it's just something that I really enjoy doing with my background. Most of the audience and most of my speakers, to be fair, are, pilots. They're in the space industry and aviation, a lot of business aviation, quite a lot of military as well. But I've also brought in, I had a gratitude psychologist, I have artists, I have musicians. And so I'm really bringing in all of these different perspectives because it's about getting that like 30,000 foot view, or if we're going to talk about space, right? Going up into Leo orbit, low Earth orbit, and looking back down and getting that new perspective.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And, one of the things that you said that really stood out to me is this idea of pivoting or transferring your skills that you already have and kind of owning them in a different way. And many times I've talked with adults or even young professionals who have a degree in something or have thought for their whole life they're going to pursue this one career and are nervous or scared
Yeah.
to make this pivot or to think, mid-career, I've been in this position for 15, 20 years and maybe this is not exciting me anymore. How do I pivot? It's a question a lot of adults have. And specifically in the context of aerospace, aerospace is so interdisciplinary, as I'm sure you know. And so a lot of folks now they're starting to realize how they can transfer their skills that maybe are non-engineering or non-STEM and kind of bring it into the aerospace industry and have its own value. And so, but then a lot of them are struggling with this idea of pivoting industries, pivoting careers. So, from
Right.
your experience with kind of dealing with this idea, and kind of working with it, what advice would you give for maybe young professionals or even adults who are looking to kind of change career paths or directions? It's a little bit nerve-wracking in the beginning. What advice would you give for them to start this process of trying to pivot your career, and just kind of navigate that process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's something that everybody faces, no matter even if they've changed careers before and they've done it, it's still daunting, right? It's new. And it's pushing the boundaries of our comfort zone. And so I always encourage people to really like get out of their mind, especially in aerospace, aviation. There's a lot of intellectual process happening, and we get kind of trapped in our own logic rules and frameworks, and that can become really rigid. And so I always invite people to pay attention to what excites them. Like, where are they lighting up? Where, even after they've had a 12-hour day, they are just buzzing with energy, because that is a signal to follow. If you're having a 5-hour day and you're drained and you like can't even form a coherent sentence and you just want to go home and numb out, that's a problem, right? So paying attention to the sensations that you actually physically are having, noticing the experience of your body, of your emotions, and not, we're not going to create a huge story around it. It's just noticing Where are you energized and where are you drained? What's feeling good? What do you want more of? And what doesn't feel good? What could you do less of? And then how do you structure your life to allow those things to happen? Sometimes the things that are really going to give you the most energy are not necessarily what you're going to be paid for. Maybe that's the soccer team that you're coaching on the weekends. Maybe that's the after school club that you decide to take a leadership position in. Maybe that is, the coach that you hired that you're like, every time you have a session, you just walk away with so many ideas, right? There's a lot of different ways that don't have to be tied to what you do for money that can energize you. And I think that's the other thing. Everyone says this whole cliche of like, follow your passions and you'll never work a day in your life. I'm going to tell you, you will still feel like it's work, but you will be willing to do it if you're passionate about it and if it's meaningful to you. If it's aligned with your values, the root of passion, it means to suffer in Latin. So, what are you willing to suffer for? Is really what you're saying when you say I'm passionate. So, are you willing to do the 12 hours for space? Yes. Are you willing to do 12 hours for accounting? No. So now okay, I want to do something in space, but let's not focus on like an accounting role. Maybe let's go into a different area, right? So you can start to kind of use that as a barometer. Um, Start talking to people. If you have an idea of where you want to go, start talking to people that are already there. What does their lifestyle look like? What are they looking forward to? What do they not like about the job? Do they have what you might qualify as a dream job, but they're working 100 hours a week? And maybe their health is declining or they're never able to be social, right? We really need to look at other factors besides what we might quantify on paper as being successful. And you start to look at what do you want to live at? That's why I liked your question. What does your day look like? Not, what are you doing all day long and how do you do the task, but just what does that look like in your world? Because when you can design that, then you can start to have a lot of clarity around, when you go to interview and you learn, is that a role for you or not? Will you thrive there or will you suffer there? I had a coach once frame this for me, and they said, the most beautiful flowers in the tropical environment of Singapore can grow in Dubai, but it needs a lot more resources to sustain it. And so once you expend all the resources and you don't give it all the extra things it needs, that's not its natural environment, it won't survive, right? So are you in your natural environment or are you forcing something that is exotic and sounds cool, but when your energy is depleted, when the allure and the glamour go away, you're like, I can't do this anymore, right? So getting really clear on that will help you to start to, navigate and pivot to the right direction. And it's just about asking this often. We don't do this once a year. We don't wait 5 years. We don't wait 10 years. If that's you, it's okay. But just start asking yourself this every week, every month. Check in regularly so that the pivots don't have to be so extreme.
I absolutely love that like insight. I actually had no idea that in Latin for the word passionate, like the root of it is, to suffer and like the way you phrased it of what is it you're willing to suffer for, I think is a really good perspective because as a student myself, I hear adults telling me all the time for any career advice, follow your heart and do what makes you happy. Everything will go smooth. And that's kind of what you hear all the time. And so you expect that in this position that you're working in, everything is just going to click and it's just going to feel easy the entire time. And I think sometimes you just need to hear it that it's not always going to be easy, but it's what are you willing to put in the work for that gives
Right.
you that, extra kick of energy to keep going. It's not going to be easy, but how you get there. I think that's a really good perspective change. And it's something that, regardless of what stage you are in your career, it's something you should always say and like think about and make sure you have in the back of your mind, like you were saying, it's not a question we ask once a time, but something you want to integrate into your life. So I think that's definitely a really great opinion. And as you were talking, I mean, I'm sure everyone who's watching can really tell you have really found yourself as a person. And I think you exude a lot of confidence. And the way you're talking about aerospace and what you're doing, it's just, you can tell that you love it. And so I'm really curious, where did this start, like journey really begin? Like, what was the aha moment that inspired you to be like, I want to enter the aerospace and aviation field? And specifically, I want to go into the communication side of things
Yeah.
because even for me growing up, I never thought I could enter the aerospace industry because I didn't want to do aerospace engineering.
Right.
I really never envisioned myself in that career until randomly I found out that you could combine biology and medicine into space and you could form a career out of that. And I was very lucky to find that out. But I think it's a very unique story for everyone. So I'm curious, what was your aha moment to discovering you wanted to pursue a career in aerospace and aviation? And how did you integrate that with somewhat of a non-traditional career to this day in space? There are not that many people who think of communications as an integral part of space, which it really is, but it's not really thought of that way. So, how did you integrate those two together, and what was your journey like?
Yeah, no, this is I always love sharing this story. So, my first two words were for star and airplane.
Really?
Said sta and ba. My mom realized after a period of time that I wasn't just babbling, but when they were moving, I called it a different word. And so just ever since I was little, I looked up at the stars. I used to love going to the planetarium. I grew up in Chicago. We went to the Adler Planetarium all the time. And, I would always just like want anything from the gift shop, science books. And, I would go to my mom's lectures, which, I usually fell asleep because I was little, but it was just, they had these sleepovers at the planetarium. And so you'd be in that theater where you're, seeing the night sky and it was like the nighttime wind down. And then you'd like go run and find your spot and like go to the exhibit that you wanted to be by. And I just loved it. And I remember back then when I was younger, there weren't that many female role models as astronauts. And I really wanted to do that. But I also had in my mind, I was like, I don't really want to do all the math and the science. Like, I like it, but it wasn't something I really wanted to focus on. So I started thinking fighter pilot route. And then I got glasses when I was in second grade, and my eyes got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so when I was in high school, I did a program called Civil Air Patrol, and you learn to fly and you some discovery flights, search and rescue. You'll learn like desert. I was in Arizona, so desert survival training. And so, I started thinking, okay, maybe the Air Force. I'll go, be a fighter pilot, and then that'll be my route. I was a scuba diver. My mom grew up, got my junior open water when I was younger, and then that transferred over as I got older. And now I'm a rescue diver. And I always used to think like must be what it's like when you're out in space. It's just it's so quiet and you're so aware of your body and the buoyancy control when you're in the water. And it was always this kind of parallel for me. But then I remember speaking to a recruiter and they said, I'm gonna be real honest with you. If it's you, and let's just say it was another woman, and you were exactly the same, exact same test scores, everything, but her eyesight was 20/20, we would choose her. Fair enough, right? And so I really thought about it, and I like flying, but I get bored after about 20 minutes. I'm not gonna lie. It's fun, but then I'm like, okay, cool, I've done it. Like, can we go back on the ground now? I'd like to do something else. And I would see my friends who would literally eat ramen and McDonald's to just get like $60 for the end of the month to get one more flight hour. And I looked at the career path, and honestly, I was not willing to do what it takes to be an airline pilot. It just did not seem like a lifestyle that I wanted. It was not of interest. I was like, I'm gonna be bored. Everything's automated. I'm just turning buttons and knobs. Like this is not where I shine. I'm a people person. So I did an aviation business degree. I figured, hey, if I decide I don't like aviation someday, I have a business degree and I understand that aspect, right? And so that's, how I got into aviation. And, I went to some air shows when I was little. I got exposure. So that's why I'm really passionate about women in STEM. And what I like to say is STEAM. Arts are very important to that conversation. And, without that exposure, maybe that wouldn't have been in my mind. Who knows what I would have gone after, right? But because I had exposure to the planetarium and to air shows, and back then we used to be able to go in the cockpit and talk to the pilots, right? So it gave me the awe and idea that it was possible. And then with space, to be quite honest, I went into the business aviation field, so private jet industry. I was in Asia for 13 years. As an American citizen living in Hong Kong, there was no space program for me, right? I do remember when Inspiration 4 went off, right? In 2021, my friend and I were on the island and we're like, the signal is going to work here because we were on Llama Island, which is like the smaller, the signal's not great. And we hiked to a spot to make sure we could watch the launch live. And our friends were like, are you done yet? And we're like, shh. This is important. And I still remember that because I was like, I found another space nerd and we're excited and it was really fun. And we still talk about it when we see each other. But, I came back to the US, didn't know I was pivoting to come back and live here full time. It was COVID times. Hong Kong had a long quarantine. And then while I was here, I had the thought like, hey, I kind of like Austin. I don't need to rush back. Next morning, my flight was canceled. I was like, that's interesting. So, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to this aviation conference because they asked me to speak. They saw I was going to be around. So I said yes. They liked what they saw me doing on more of the mindset and well-being side of things. And that was so needed, especially in dispatch and operations where life is 24/7. People are like staring at a screen all day. They're not, taking breaks, eating junk food, that type of stuff. And while I was there, I saw a keynote speaker, Michelle Mace Curran. She's a fighter pilot. So not only was I like, oh my God, this is like what I would have done if I would have been her, right? She went through this exercise and it was about being bold and taking chances. She's like, what's that dream that you put on the shelf that like you haven't looked at it for a while? Maybe it's dusty. Like, let's dust it off. Let's look at it. And it was like my eyes were closed and I just had this like big flashing neon sign that said space and behind my closed eyes. And I was like, okay, I think it's time to just revisit this. Obviously, we now have commercial pilots. There's differences in the industry. It's totally opening up. I don't need to be a rocket scientist or an engineer. Just like I talk about business aviation, we need accountants and marketers and salespeople and logistics support and everything in between. We need the same things in space. So I start talking about my interest in space. I go and talk to the head of the organization, and he's like, "Oh, Sarah, I didn't know you love space." He's like, "Did you know Dr. Cyan Proctor is speaking at leadership? Are you going?" And I was like, "I am now." Right? And he's like, "Oh my gosh, absolutely. And you know what? I can introduce you." And I was like, "I'm definitely coming." Right? So I was like, "This is great." Um, Later that day, I'm at a networking event, a young professionals networking event. And someone's like, "Oh, you're Sarah. Ed was telling me about you. You love space, right?" And I was like, "Yes." Kind of like that's a little weird, but okay, yes, that's me. She's like, "Oh, well, I used to be in the space industry and I like was the one who handled Cyan last year and like, we'll go have dinner." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Like it's just happening. Cool. I'm gonna let this happen." So fast forward to the next conference and my friend's messaging. She's like, "I haven't seen Cyan yet, but don't worry. Like I know she's coming to the cocktail tonight." And I literally am like, "Okay." And I put my phone down and there's Cyan right in front of me. So I was like, "All right, I'm gonna go say hi." So I go and say hi to her, and we just had like the best conversation. She's so kind and so personable. Um, and like I have to admit, it was the first time in my life, like I used to watch people go crazy over superstars and stuff. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? They're just humans. And especially working in business aviation, I got a peek behind the curtains. Some of them are not nice humans, right? So um I was never starstruck, but on the inside, I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to an astronaut. Like, is this real? Right? And then she's like, "Oh, you live in Austin? I'm gonna be in Austin for South by Southwest. Like, let's hang out. Here's my phone number." And I was like, "What?" Okay. And so, that happened. And then I met Loretta Whitesides. I did Space Kind. I went to the Analog Astronaut Conference, and the rest is history. It was just like I found my tribe of people. This is fun. I felt like a little kid again. And so I was just lit up. And the next thing led to the next thing. And I wasn't trying to force anything. I was just seeing what's possible. And it's been a wild ride. I mean, that was literally just 2022 that happened. No, wait, 23, I think. Yes, it was 23 that happened. So it's only been like less 2 years really that I've been in this position of actually being in the aerospace industry, and not just aviation. And I'm finding that it is just this like fun ride. There's so many cool things happening. Everywhere you look, there's something fascinating happening, something interesting. And I love seeing how many more women there are. We met through, Rachel Lyon's Cosmic Women group. And it's just really, I feel like it's a real potent and powerful time for anyone who's a space enthusiast to get their curiosity, and go and see what's possible.
Definitely. Wow. I'm truly inspired by what you've been able to do with your journey so far and how you took that almost leap of faith or that calling. You kind of followed that path that was kind of being laid out for you without forcing yourself to stick with something that you've been a part of before.
Yeah.
And you were open to this idea of networking, of opening your eyes to your true passions and kind of how you can integrate all your skills together without being constricted to a field. I think that's a really, really powerful trait to have, even, our audience is mainly for students. And I always like, even as a student myself, I think it's something I'll definitely take to heart. It's you might think you love something and it's, I want to go down this path. And then when you're in it, there might be other things that call you more. And it's important to listen to it instead of ignoring it until it becomes too late or not too late, but you just spent so much time where you could have been doing other things to really help your passion. And so I think that's, wow, that's wonderful. And she's a wonderful, amazing, inspiring woman who's really paved the path for so many young girls in space. And so yeah, my last and final question for you is you've had just such an interesting journey and story. I really want to ask about your experiences in Hong Kong as well. I can't
Okay.
imagine how it was to live in a different country and interact with the space economy in a different country. And maybe that's like a whole other separate podcast in itself. But I think that's such a cool experience. I love traveling. So I think it would be very cool to hear your insights into living in a different country, especially Hong Kong, and what that was like for you. But I want to wrap this interview up by really asking for you've given plenty of advice throughout this interview. But what is, if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, maybe when you were, college student or you just graduated high school, kind of like entering adult phase, what advice would you give to yourself? Like all the students who are listening out there, what advice would you give them and what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh man. Well, hopefully she would have listened, because when I was that age, I thought I knew everything. Um, and the older you get, the more you realize that you know very, very little, right? Like the more you learn that you know, then you know that you don't know a lot. So what I would really say is life is really a game, and you can choose how you play it. And there's many games in life. So if you're playing a game that's no longer fun, find a new one. Learn what the rules are. And sometimes you don't need to follow the rules. You play outside of them because you create a new game. And sometimes people look at you and think you're crazy, and that's okay too, right? Like you need to experiment, you need to learn how to do these things. But in that whole process of playing these games and figuring it out, it's like test, trial, iterate, learn, try again, try something new. It's a big science experiment. Um, do it with intention and be really present for it. Because there will come a time when you're going to long for the days of university and you're going to miss those moments. So, like, truly just allow yourself to enjoy where you are now instead of always trying to get to the next thing. I think that one of my biggest um, hurdles is always to slow down. That's why I talk about it so much because when you slow down, you get more information. You can actually take more in, and that's going to give you the signal that you need to help you make the decisions of where you go next, what job you choose, what internship you say yes to. So, play the game, figure it out, have fun along the way, but be really, really present for it. Don't try to rush it.
I definitely agree with what you were saying. I think it's so important that, I mean, first off, listen to the advice that others around you give. I know I hear that from my parents all the time. They're like, oh, when I was your age, I didn't listen to anyone because I was like, I know what I'm doing. And it's definitely good to have confidence in yourself, but also just remember to take the advice from others because they've been through what you're about to go through. And there might be something from there that you could take away and apply to your own life. But always just being mindful of being aware of everything that's happening around you, how you're feeling, being open to changing and pivoting, as you like to say, and really finding that true passion that makes you happy. And so, I definitely will carry this advice with me, and I'm sure everyone who's listening will as well. But thank you so much, Sarah, for taking
You're
your
welcome.
time to do this interview. I honestly love seeing incredibly powerful women who are doing incredible things in the aerospace industry. It gives me a lot of inspiration to become more confident and to really chase after my passions. And so I really appreciate you taking your time to do this interview today and to share your unique story, and especially about your career change and your pivoting, and the way you integrated your different expertise together. I think this is something many students ask me about, and I don't have the experience to share. And so I know they'll really appreciate listening to someone who has explored multiple fields and put them together to find your unique story and yourself. And so really thank you so much for sharing your story today. I'm positive that many students or anyone who's listening was able to take away something from you today. So thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And if anyone has any questions about the pivots or, just wants to, ask a question about something they heard today, you can follow me at Sarah the Pivoter on any socials. You should be able to find me. I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'll link it all down below. Thank you.
Thank you.